attention to. Whenever you're ready.
So class, today I'll be talking about fully autonomous vehicles and why autonomous vehicles will eventually phase out traditional driving in 5 years. I know what you're thinking, that's a pretty short period of time, but it's honestly not. The way technology is advancing now is pretty fast. Let me just go over a couple of points on why this is going to happen. Autonomous vehicles in their current state have substantially less collisions. This is just the current technology now. They take the most efficient route. They're equipped with, a bunch of really high-tech gadgets that optimize fuel efficiency and your current direction of travel. And then the technology accelerating at an extremely fast pace. Why is there a desire to phase out traditional driving? Well, there's a lot of problems with it now. People get into a lot of accidents. There's a report stating that most, if not all, accidents happen because there's a human driver behind the wheel. Who else would be driving a car, right? So let me go to my first point. Let's go back to substantially reduced collisions. Artificial intelligence would suffer from usual human conditions that would affect driving performance in critical moments. So if somebody's driving drunk, an artificial intelligence wouldn't actually be drunk at any point in its life cycle. It wouldn't suffer from, dementia or Alzheimer's, where's the stick shift kind of thing, which is good. According to Google, in their August 2016 report, a fleet of 58 vehicles have driven around 1,700 miles without a single collision. That's impressive, and that's just the technology now. Imagine what it's going to be like in 5 years. Pretty good. Extend that time frame, 10, 20, and we've got, sky numbers. Let's move on to my second point. Autonomous vehicles in their current state take the most efficient route. Human drivers are not capable of computing the exact miles per hour needed to achieve maximum fuel efficiency every nanosecond. So, humans do get distracted every once in a while. Look at that bunny over there on the side of the road, it's dead. Roadkill. That would, not give you the best fuel efficiency because, your steering wheel might have turned to the right, whatever. But if we remove the human element out of that equation altogether, the AI would take over and just, save you a decent amount of gas, time, effort. Human drivers sometimes forget directions. If you put an AI in front of the driver's seat, the AI is not going to forget directions. Especially if everything's global. If it's on the cloud, okay, maybe if it loses connection, that would be kind of a bad thing. But we're talking global. This is great because if you remove the human element, you decrease the amount of spending on fuel and decrease the amount of carbon emissions emitted from automobiles by 50% more, according to an analysis of possible energy impacts of autonomous vehicles written in 2014 by somebody. This brings me to my next point. Technology trends have accelerated at an extremely fast pace. With this, multiple car brands have declared that most of their cars will be fully autonomous by 2021. They're also predicting that fully autonomous vehicles will be completely actualized and realized in the year 2021. I'm not the only person making this prediction, which is great. I'm not alone. And to add on to this, storage capacity is halving in price and doubling in capacity every 12 months. So lithium-ion batteries now for electric cars, get 200 some odd miles per charge. An example for Tesla. Take that in 5 years and we'll get like 400 miles per hour. Or 400 miles per charge. if technology keeps increasing at the pace that it actually is. And the source for this is written by Ray Bernard, at least he has noticed this trend, called Increasing Pace of Technological Innovation. And this is my prediction. Eventually, when the technology gets to the point where everything is just kind of instantaneous, we got great internet and Wi-Fi speeds, and internet is like that, we're going to have a global neural auto network with all of the electric vehicles and fully autonomous vehicles hooked up into some giant cloud hive mind. Similar to the concept of Skynet, where everything would be able to pinpoint weather conditions, optimal traffic routes, and possible collision detection based on the speed that you're going. Basically a cloud grid that would allow for more fidelity, control, and awareness of traffic and other nearby conditions. And to summarize, that's why I am stating that autonomous vehicles will phase out traditional driving within the next 5 years, although not completely. There should always be some sort of human intervention possibility if something does go haywire, like the AI becoming self-aware, for example. And thank you for listening to my speech. That is all I have to say on this subject.
Actually, yeah.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Get up there for me. Do this good.
I could always just take a train.
Just don't know exactly where it is.
I know. Or yeah, you can call it Uber. Just I think when I'm in a train to Uber and then
All right, Matt, you've got a couple of things that are going pretty well here and a couple of things that you need to work on. You ID the topic clearly, there's no problem there. You've got a very specific proposition, and including the time element in it in the next 5 years, I think makes it even more controversial that there's plenty of room for dispute on this. And I can see a couple of places immediately where the respondent will be able to address some arguments based on the time frame that you've created. You do have a preview, although it sounded a little bit like you had kind of started the organizational structure, and then it does turn out to be a preview. So it's just a matter of phrasing there. I think it could be a little bit clearer. But there was a preview, and you laid out those points pretty clearly for us. I thought that was fine. There was a little bit of background information on some of the problems with traditional cars, particularly with the dangers that are presented. You had some, data about driving issues, and I think that's sort of outside of the structure. That's okay. I think keeping it in the introduction is the best thing. It might be a good idea to use that as your attention device. Start off by talking about, every year we lose X number of people through accidents. We, cost this amount of money in terms of economic activity. We have this amount of time that gets lost as a result of these sorts of things. And these are all things that people are, we've been striving to address and reduce constantly for 100 years, that automobiles have been widely used and available, and the technology has been improving to reduce those things all the time. We're now at the final stage where we can eliminate those things, and my claim today is, and then you can maybe present your claim. And I think then you'll have given us enough context so we can see why it is we're listening to the argument, and then that stuff won't get confused with your secondary points, which you're presenting later on. You did a good job signposting the secondary points as you got to each one of them. You kind of introduced that concept or relate that stuff about the potential problems with driving with your hypotheticals of, there aren't any drunken AIs or AI with dementia. And at least that we know of. I'm not exactly sure, we'd have to talk about how the AIs work, that sort of thing. But, but you present that primarily as a premise, which I think is not an unreasonable premise. What we need a little bit more of is some demonstration that AIs would be able to function in the way that you're talking about. This is a very complex system that is being discussed here. The number of cars that have to move, the number of people that are being moved, the locations that they're going to, the roads that they have to travel on, the obstacles that they might run into in between, the directions that they're traveling. And in essence, this is one of those things that's going to require a complex matrix of information. And I can see bugs in the system, and I think that that's probably where there would be a little bit of pushback on this, and that I imagine will be one of the points that the respondent's going to be talking about. Your evidence on this point I thought was a little thin. You had, Google has 58 vehicles that have traveled 1,000 miles. I traveled 1,000 miles last 2 weeks, and the fact that I haven't had an accident, I don't think proves that I'm a good driver, so I think that that's a little sketchy. Now it sounds like you're saying it's actually 100,000 miles or something like that. You had a correction there, but you said 1,000 miles in the speech. That's what I heard. So we can check back on the video and make sure that you always want to get that correct. Even then, I think, 58 vehicles versus how many vehicles are there in the country or in the world, and in essence you're saying that we're going to be able to make an inference from that. I think that's a little bit problematic. I think you need some stronger evidence on this, especially some expert testimony that is making predictions about what the likely patterns are going to be and how fast the technology is going to improve. Maybe some, especially I can see consumer resistance to these sorts of issues, and that might be an issue that comes up. It's just, like I said, that'll be one of those things that I'm sure that you'll get pushback on in the refutation speech. So we'll let that person take care of those arguments. Your data on the second point is really just all premises. There isn't really any separate information on it, except you do have one piece of information about the fuel efficiency. And I think that needed to be a little bit more substantial, as it was, and talk about why that's important and why we need that. As it is, it just seems like it's kind of sitting there without enough context to justify this. Lots of hypotheticals on that particular point. The technology improvements, I think, are, you make the inference about how we're doubling capacity on lithium batteries, for instance, and I'm wondering, okay, well, do all technologies work this way? Within 12 months, the technology doubles in its productivity or efficiency or that sort of thing. That seems to be the standard that you're applying, so that would suggest that whatever issues are faced with autonomous cars now, within 5 years, those bugs are all going to disappear because we have this kind of geometric progression that we're making toward that system. I'm still waiting for my flying car that I was promised back in the 1950s, so I'm not exactly sure that that's a safe trend for you to depend on. And I think there are other arguments that could be made here about how many other companies, for instance, are experimenting with autonomous cars, how some of this technology is already being introduced into existing vehicles and we don't even recognize it, how all of us have already taken a couple steps on this when we use GPS and those sorts of things. And I think it would be easier to make the argument that says, look, you think it's something kind of weird. It's just one more progressive step on something that we've already been doing. And I think that would be a lot more convincing if you sell it that way. The pacing, I think, is a little bit slow. I'm not exactly sure that the analogy to Skynet helps you in this argument. I think it might actually have the opposite effect, so you might want to be a little bit careful about that. All right, thank you.